Thank you, everybody, for joining us today, and thank you to Sheikh Ahour and to Noura and all of the amazing team, the education team that have put together this very special edition of the March meetings. We were just talking about how beautiful it is to be doing it at night and to be in this space in the evening. Most of the time when we were installing in this space, it was daytime, so it's very special to be here with all of you. Thank you so much for being with us. And I just wanted to say on behalf of my fellow curators, it's really wonderful to be able to return back to Cary, and to be in a space of gathering and to be in a moment to reflect on, revisit the many beautiful projects that we launched here a month ago, and to be able to revisit them and to be in conversation with people that inspire us, other musicians, poets, as well as to be back here with the artists that we have been working with. Earlier just now, Sheikh Ahour was mentioning kind of the many ways that we start to think about the possibility of what to carry songs are. For us, when we were conceiving of these 3 days, we were thinking that particular line in our list of to carry, this idea of to carry songs, really was an expansive way to think about what a song can be. And of the many ways that we were thinking through this idea of song, one of the ones we were thinking about is this idea of song being a space to gather, a space to learn together, and a space to listen. And so it feels really appropriate and very special to be back here in Al-Qasimiyya School. It's been a huge pleasure to be able to install work here, and many of the works here that you'll see in the many rooms around us are works by artists that have been really thinking about this idea of an expansive sense of pedagogy, of what it means to gather, to learn, to be together. And I love that we're all in the schoolyard together, and also in the embrace, like a song, of these works by Hashel Al Lamki, who's with me right here. And we wanted to start off day one with the voices of the artists that have been presenting work here. So following our conversation, we'll be also listening to the amazing Mohammed Al-Hawajri and Dina Matar, and the work, they'll be speaking about their work, and they are presenting work right here next to me. And alongside them, we have artists, collectives like Bil Naas, Bint Mbarah, Concrete Repertoire, the group Voice of Domestic Workers, Suzanne Lacey, an incredible archive of Chandra Lekha upstairs, and the work of Dilek Winchester. All of these are kind of inviting us to think and gather about art in the world. But we're going to have our conversation now, Hashel. Hi.
Hi.
So Hashel Al Lamki, just to introduce you, is an Emirati artist who grew up in Al Ain but is now based in Abu Dhabi, and was one of the first artists that I had the privilege of having a studio visit with when I was starting to do my research here in the Emirates. And it was really important for me as I was forming the ideas that I wanted to bring on my project for the biennial, which is named Throwing Shells, was to kind of have conversations with artists through sharing a story myself and giving an offering. And I really wanted to kind of think about the types of practices, stories, identities that are not often centered in mainstream narratives of what it means to be Khaliji. And one of the things that I initially thought about was this idea of throwing shells, or fal, which is a practice of divination that I'm very familiar with in Bahrain. And I was having a studio visit with Hashel because I was really drawn to your paintings
Yes.
of landscapes that I felt were very animistic in nature, very emotional, and were portraying the kind of mountains and hills of the Emirates in a way I hadn't seen before. And I felt like that really resonated, and I wanted to know more. And as I got to know more and shared the story of throwing shells, you're one of the only artists that has done it and knew about it. And I was like, okay, there's something here for us to talk about together. And then I got to know that you have a very interesting material sculptural practice that you have as well. And you were using material like deer blood and organic materials here. And I was very curious and decided it was really important to invite you to intervene here and produce a site-specific work in response to this school. So maybe just to start off, Hashel, it would be wonderful to hear more about how you started to develop this project, which is called Maat. And and just to say, Hashel has 2 works here in the biennial, 2 new commissions, and there's another work called Part-Time Lovers in the Sharjah Art Museum. But yeah.
Yes. First of all, thank you, Amal, and thank you, Saf, for inviting me to be part of March meetings, but also to be part of the 16th edition of Sharjah Biennial. To reflect back on the process when we started, almost by May, it will be 2 years since we started talking about the biennial and the project, and a lot that happened along the way and a lot of discoveries that I appreciate the trust and the space to nurture these ideas, and also to provide a safe environment for us to congregate today at the Qasimiyya School and share some of these ideas with the public, and hopefully this would ignite like more conversation moving forward. When I first started, when we first like got on board to think about the project, I didn't really have a site. Like I didn't know what to produce, and I've just completed a huge project prior to that. It was like a survey show from 2004 till 2023. So I was kind of like a bit in a pause moment where I'm also lost, and I was trying to seek guidance for the next chapter. And obviously, like as you mentioned, I'm trained as a painter, and that's what a lot of my work been around. But I always like felt I wanted to push painting outside of painting as a medium, and like challenge myself to have different conversations about mediums and see how I can infiltrate, you know, the painterly manners that I have into like other mediums. And with the installation here, I mean, it is a textile installation, but when I look at it from the back of my head, it's almost like a big painting. These are like brush strokes. And then with my painting techniques, you would see moments where I focus to render specific topics. So you see that in like the different panels. And now maybe just to reflect also on the process when you invited me and you shared your text, and I was just in a moment of inspiration, and like trying to also metaphorically and personally apply this method of throwing shells and seeking guidance. And to be honest, as I mentioned, like that sweet moment that I had, but also I'm not different than anyone else around us. So I've seen like a lot of violence in the past 2 years, and I was also in a vulnerable state of mind and not able to do anything. And to me, I felt honestly like it starts with the self. If you try to help yourself, and kind of like then you become a reflection, and that becomes a way of hoping for something better in the world.
Oh
And
yeah,
this
so
is
this
your
is
text.
so yeah. Just to say, as a way of, as a curator, almost all of the projects that I worked on for this biennial are brand new commissions, and I always shaping a project with the artists in conversation from the beginning. It develops and changes into something very different by the end. And I'm very interested in risk and surprise and trust. But yeah, this is an image which is instructions for how to throw shells. I actually shared a story of my grandmother who was a lamenter in Bahrain, and I was like really interested in thinking about what indigenous knowledge, practices and rituals, bodies of knowledge really that are being suppressed here in the region. How do we remember and listen to the sea, to each other? How do we do things collectively? And so here are the instructions that I learned of how to throw shells. And this is a very beautiful depiction of the instructions by an artist called Rose Nordin, who's based in London. So did you do it? Did you do some shell throwing before you developed the project?
To me, like the throwing shells was in a different metaphoric way where I actually started applying to different residencies and trying to seek knowledge in different contexts and challenge myself to get outside of my comfort zone of being in my studio and just producing and wanting to connect with different audiences and trying to also gain some knowledge that I didn't have. I'm very curious as a child. So that was my response, is just applying. And then I got 3 opportunities that bounced back. And the first reading of this attempt to understand was actually getting a residency in Mallorca in Spain. And I was there for 2 months at a Belmont hotel. It's La Residencia. And that was like the beginning, and still I wasn't really sure about like what's happening, how are we doing, but the idea of being on an island that had to do with like escaping the everyday life and romanticizing and fantasizing about an escape, being in a hotel and everything is catered and curated experience. So I was trying to understand those nuances, and I became friends with the laundry department for some reason. And actually, this is one of the first panels that I produced in the residency. It's made out of recycled bed sheets. And also was interested in standards, the idea of what makes a standard like qualified or not. So I was collecting the rejected napkins from the hotel and the bed sheets and dyeing them. And then from there, I came to know about this school. Like you told me about the sites. I came back and I had a great experience to see the space when it's empty and learn about the historical fact about the school being the first prototype public school and then replicated nationwide. And I felt there is a responsibility that I want to honor and acknowledge this space, the students and the teachers in the work that I wanted to produce. So you see, like the beginning was a bit abstract, like it didn't have any clear message. I was just experimenting. And then slowly from there, like it started building up into like specific messages, and then Maat came part of the conversation, and like what message do we want to say? How do we actually try to I don't know, like maybe have some hope in like a state of despair and try to remind ourselves like that, you know, moral values are important. And like if we remind ourselves and like keep transcending this message, you know, hopefully, you know, we do
It
something.
gets communicated.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was really interested in this process because I feel like throughout this last year and a bit of conversation, we were just always in touch as you were like going through these different journeys. And I think there was something that was growing. I think you were very, in an open way, experimenting and listening and learning together in these different spaces.
Yeah.
About methods of working with material.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear more about the two other spaces you went to, like maybe your experiences there.
Yeah.
And yeah, we could speak about Shrishti maybe first.
Yes. So after Spain, I came back. I saw the space, and then I had an opportunity to go to India, Kerala. And when I was there, I was interested in natural pigments and how methods of pigments extraction is communicated and translated through generations. And I came across a beautiful institution in Munnar. It's 3 hours outside of Kochi, towards like the tea plantation hills. And it's a very unique trust fund that looks after school program for special needs students, and working with them, embracing them, integrating them into society, and having an after curriculum program. And during that time, I was like, okay, how do I start like communicating and trying to produce work there? So you could see some of these. Well, okay, we're like few slides back, but this is the the first residency and like the idea of what we spoke. But here, this is when I was in India and I was interested in like integrating and working with this community and how do we extract pigments. And what's also interesting and sacred about the program is their pigment extractions come from temple offerings. So they would collect all these flowers and they bring them back to the facility and then create dyes. So some of these textiles are produced there and in collaboration with the community. And so that's the next stop in the journey.
Yeah.
And then after that, I came back. So I was like always back and forth in this journey between my studio that it's based in Musaffah, Abu Dhabi, and then like doing these trips in between. And then I had the opportunity to go to Cairo and spend some time there. And I've always been interested in making hands-on experiences, and one of the visits there was like visiting Harani neighborhood, which is historically known for weaving, also Khayamiya in Bab al-Zuwayla and in Bab al-Sha'riya as well, where there is like all these different artisans who have been there for generations, who've been producing different types of works on textile, whether it's the embroidery of the Kiswat al-Kaaba or Khayamiya, which you see in some of the panels. And what's also interesting in this process, I think subconsciously I was taking things from different parts and then moving them in between spaces with me. So some of the initial dyes that I did in Mallorca went to India and then went to Cairo. And so it's been always like this kind of like journey, movement. And I think that's like a beautiful way to look at patterns of migration and also knowledge sharing, because we're all like trying to share a moment, and this idea of like this textile been touched by different communities and each one had something to contribute to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what we thought we would do is kind of speak here to some of these different works, which we'll do in a little bit. But I just wanted to ask another question, because you worked with kind of kiswa artisans, embroiderers. You worked with very, very traditional forms of embroidery that like have a lot of weight behind them. I know that the kiswa artisans the embroiderers you worked with, like they're from a kind of school of people who generationally would be the embroiderers of the covering of the Kaaba, for example.
Yeah.
But now that economy has shifted. So I just wanted to hear a little bit more about particularly these methods and what that meant for you, and whether that influenced the kind of stories you were telling, and maybe we can speak to the two methods that you were using in Egypt and the groups of people you were working with.
Yeah. Just to like step back, like before I speak about the communities, I think when the opportunity came and there was like this trust and we built this kind of relationship that, here's a budget, go dream. And for me, it was like, I was like, okay, I could do, I could just stay in my studio and do something that I already know, or I can like somehow maybe try to capture this idea of being in a school and put myself in a school again and learn from people that have been doing these practices for quite some time. And that's where I was like, okay, I'm gonna break down the budget into like production, but also there is a way of knowledge sharing and exchange of knowledge between myself and the different groups. Some of them are like, for instance, in India, it was like an institution, so it was like more structured in a way. But in Cairo, it was really like landing in a place of endless possibilities and just seeing all these different artisans who's been like doing this, and like families, and like trying to also test with the same technique. There is like multiple, artisans that do the same thing, and had to like build also like some tests and like learn, okay, who I can like commission to produce a piece, and worked with them, learned about the technique, and I should also mention the art institution in Cairo where I was hosted to produce the work. They also helped me a lot to meet the different artisans. And from that, I developed to like different techniques. Now, going back to your question about the Kiswat al-Kaaba, and I was interested in also the idea of economy and how the shift of power also becomes a huge responsibility of what I'm trying to tell as a story, as you mentioned, like for a long period of time, Kiswat al-Kaaba was done in Cairo, and like it's back to back, so they do it every year. So as soon as they finish, they start the next one. And until like 2 years ago, as per my artisan community, that shifted to Jeddah, and a lot of the artisans who were specialized in producing the kiswa have lost their jobs. And I wanted to revive that concept and like try, they're two small pieces, but just to highlight and bring that conversation, that how do I look at these economies into contemporary discourse, and also how do I relate to it conceptually. So the two panels that are here, there is the snakes and ladder.
So that's the snakes and ladders just there. That's actually made with silver thread, right?
Yes, and yes.
And the Kiswat al-Kaaba is made with gold thread,
Gold,
is that
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then the central circular panel, it's not lit, but that circle, that's actually made with copper.
Copper, yes. So when I wanted to like revisit this technique, I obviously didn't want to go through a scripted text or like kind of like the given expected technique. I wanted also to learn and allow the artisans to get outside of their comfort zone and do something different. So first they were like, oh, we don't know how to do, like, what are you trying to say? And then we worked on the first piece, which was the snakes and ladder. And I was interested in this idea of, again, the karma and, you know, throwing shells or throwing a dice and there's a number and you kind of play, and I grew up playing that game, and it was kind of an idea of recreating also from memory. And then the circular piece is actually based on a prayer mat that Muhammad Basha commissioned an artisan to create a prayer mat. And I wanted, that's a table runner from my time in Spain that I dyed and I took to Cairo and then worked on it, but also this idea of multi-directional, so kind of like the shape decided on like start from some like a referential aspect of the work, but also look at it from a bigger discourse.
And I think there are many stories here, and something to say is that this process that Hashel has been doing, it was very, very responsive, very much like thinking about what it is to hand over, collaborate with different groups, with artisans who are sharing knowledge with you and supporting their economy at the same time. But there are also many stories that are gathered in this collection of cloths. And I think we want to take a moment after this to actually acknowledge how crazy and beautiful it was to install this, because you had collected all of these different materials. We were waiting for travel, you know, you were going back to the artisans, bringing it back to your studio. And it was really like just a few weeks before the opening that we came here with the amazing help of Yusra.
Yes.
Shout out to Yusra. Woo! And of course, Pooja and Jahan, our assistant cats. But we were, you know, I remember going to your studio and I'm like, wow, everything is really different, and everything has a story and a life, and somehow there was this really interesting alchemy as we started to put it together in this space, because this courtyard is built in 1971. It's a very, very special square. I love it. I love the light in this space. But it was kind of like, wow, we're going to bring all of these different textures, colors, these feelings, this knowledge from all these different groups here to one place. And I think lots of interesting things happened, like just under where the snakes and ladder piece is, we discovered there was an actual drawing of a snakes and ladder game on the floor of the school. So it's almost like there are these like unintentional synchronicities with these things. But on top of these layers, I feel like there are stories. And I'd love to hear you talk about this piece, which is one of two that's just over there, which is another Egyptian technique. But I'd love to hear about the technique and the story.
Yes, so it's the Khayamiya technique. It's usually made for like tents for different ceremonies, whether it's weddings or funerals, receptions in Egypt. And I wanted to visit that as one of the techniques that to produce the panels. But also, if you allow me, sometimes my work can stem from a personal biographical searching and calling. And this is a perfect example for that. I come from a family that used to trade clothes back in the 60s, and they were in the spice route industry. And then from there, in 64, that was in Zanzibar, by the way, and 64 they had they call it Mapinduzi, which is the revolution against the Sultanate. And a lot of my family had to flee to other lands, and one of the stops actually was Cairo. Abdel Nasser welcomed them, and few went to Iraq, and from there they came back to Oman, and my dad worked for BP before it became ADNOC, and that's my story. So I wanted to shout out to my family also and include them and kind of like tie in this conversation of me trying to figure out the past, but also to figure out the present, but also through the lens of the past, this idea of like ancestral trauma that I'm trying to heal from. I came through them and they've witnessed war firsthand, and there is violence that is happening around us right now. So there's like all these like self-helping, and in the hopes that I'm good and I do good, and that reflects.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And I feel like these are that like within each of these works you've shared, there's like so much vulnerability, and it manifests materially, but also in these narratives behind them and these stories. And there's a lot of different works here, and I just wanted to maybe we can maybe point out a few of them, because I was obsessed with the 1-800 number, and a few things. Maybe we can talk about that in a minute, but maybe overall we can speak about the title, which is Maat, and we haven't spoken about that at all, but Maat is the name of an Egyptian goddess, and I think Maat translates to truth, but maybe you could tell us the story of Maat, and then we could speak to maybe that piece and 1-800.
Okay. I think the title came after I knew that the space is the courtyard and the school. Sorry, I need to stop moving. It came after I knew about the space and I understood the integrity of where we are gathering today and what kind of messages that our teachers would want to transcend to us today. And like, I'm also fascinated about one of the concepts in the Mayan culture, like every action you do today, it will reflect for 7 generations. So kind of like start from there and like looking into ancient histories that had already laid down some principles of how we could operate as human beings. And I think this is the time where, you know, my anxiety of like, how do I make a response to what's going on, but without having to make work that it's reflecting now. It's more of a positive message rather than like being aggressive or like an angry child, like more welcoming conversations to happen and people to kind of like reflect on that. So Maat is basically 42 questions that are doubled, and they're asked after you're passed away by 42 different governors of Egypt. And basically the first 42 questions you would have to answer no, and then the other 42, the same questions, and you say yes. And there is a lot of questions that ask, like, I did not hurt someone, I did not steal, I did not commit robbery, and etc. But for me, what stood out the most is the 3 questions that are listed there. And
so this panel right here, which is an ombre glitter.
yes,
with 3 questions written in Arabic. And so these are some of the questions that Maat will ask you. So the idea is that when in ancient Egyptian culture, when you die, you have to answer these questions, and they weigh your heart with a feather, and your heart must be lighter than a feather, and then you can pass on.
Yes.
So what are these 3 questions?
So within the 42 questions, I was interested in the questions that affected the soul, whether it's a tree, whether it's an animal, whether it's a human being. So these are like the 3 questions, and it asks in Arabic, هل كنت سببا في دموع إنسان? Were you a reason for someone's tears? And then هل كنت سببا في شقاء حيوان? Were you a reason for an animal to suffer? And the third one is were you هل كنت سببا هل عذبت نباتا فنسيت أن تسقيه ماء, which is basically, did you forget to water a plant, and that was the reason for it to suffer. So I was like trying to connect with the soul, and how do we like navigate through everyday life, and comment on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we wanted actually to read them all, but I don't think that's something we're going to do. But yeah, I wondered, I mean, there's a lot of different little offerings and questions that you have here which touch on kind of like an ongoing, you know, thematic in your work that looks at land, that looks at, I think, the spiritual, like the sacred aspect of land and the relationship to nature. But we also have this 1-800. Who was it? It was like the psychic in New York. What's the story?
Yes. So this is how I try to join the popular culture. It's a psychic, Miss Cleo. She was popular in early 2000, and she had a hotline and a TV show where people would like call to seek guidance, and she was Haitian psychic, and I wanted to also include that in a, you know, like kind of like start like from ancient history to like where we are today in our society. So that's the 1-800 number.
I love it. But thank you, Hashel, for sharing some of the stories behind this this work, Maat. I don't know if we have time. We have a bit of time to open up to any questions anyone might have. Otherwise, we can speak about one other work.
Yeah.
Are there any? I can't really see, actually, anything. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can,
but I mean, maybe we could just we could maybe touch on a little bit of part-time lovers.
Yes.
But yeah, do you want to say a few words about this painting series?
Yes. So there is another project in the Biennial at the Sharjah Art Museum, Part-Time Lovers, and I was interested in trying to understand the relationship between the cycles of the sun and the moon, and how they complement each other, and what are the different climate change issues that are affecting us and our experiences. I'm a strong believer that man and nature mold each other, their experiences, and there is a lot of like intervention with the divine, which is nature, and I think that is something that we need to remind ourselves to be careful. So it's a 6-panel paintings with smaller pieces that each painting or each panel is a on its own, like from the three pillars of creation, to the mountain that we spoke about, Jabal Hafit and Al Ain, to going back to space with the obsession of invading other planets. And I wanted to kind of understand and contextualize where are we and what's our history and where it's going. So there is all these different conversations that are happening in this. Yes.
Thank you, Hashel. Well, thank you so much for giving us this many, many canopies and bringing a lot of movement and color and many people's hands and knowledge to the school. Yeah, thank you so much, Hashel.